Welcome, it is Mitch. I am on YouTube. If you haven't already, please click subscribe, like, comment on the videos, interact in some way. Appreciate all the support. Green Bay beats Indianapolis on Sunday. They moved to 1-1 on the season, turn their focus, their attention to the Tennessee Titans, who are 0-2 after losses to Chicago and the New York Jets. Wanted to look back on Sunday one last time here. We did it last week. We're going to do it again this week. Packers snap counts and what stood out from the snap count totals in week 2 in that win over the Colts. Gonna not bury the lead here. We're gonna dive right in. Kind of wondering what's going on at cornerback, and it's a good problem that the Packers have, and you can't even say it's a problem. It's a good thing going on for Green Bay. It's depth, it's options at the cornerback position for Matt LaFleur, for defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley and company to sort of dissect on a week-in, week-out basis. If you go back and watch the snap counts video from last week, one of the topic points I brought up was Carrington Valentine. Thought he had a really good rookie year, 7th-round pick out of Kentucky a season ago. Had to step into some big shoes. Injuries to Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes last year. There were times where Carrington Valentine, and of course after Rasul Douglas got dealt at the trade deadline to Buffalo, there were moments where you looked around, you're like, Carrington Valentine right now is the number one cornerback for Green Bay based on injuries trade, and he stepped up to the plate in a lot of big moments, having to cover some big-name wide receivers. Week 1, against Philadelphia, as we turn the page to the 2024 campaign, Jair's good to go. Eric Stokes is back, thankfully, for both cases there, obviously, that they're healthy and on the field. But week 1 against Philadelphia, seldom were the times that Carrington Valentine was on the field. In fact, he only logged 9 snaps in week 1 against the Eagles compared to 67 of a possible 76 for Eric Stokes, the CB2 for Green Bay. And I merely pointed out that I expected as the weeks went on that Carrington Valentine's snap count total would tick up because I thought he was too good, quite frankly, to play so few snaps. Now, matchups might dictate some of that moving forward. I did not expect the jump that we saw in week 2 against Indianapolis, and that jump that we saw was by the time the zeros hit the clock and Green Bay won and escaped with a victory against Indianapolis, Carrington Valentine played more snaps than Eric Stokes on Sunday. Valentine was out there for 32 of a possible 56 snaps on defense, good for 57%. Stokes was out there for 24 of 56, good for 43%. And now as I watched that game, Stokes played early and often and played the bulk majority of that first half at the CB2 spot for Green Bay. It was in the second half when Valentine got his opportunities, and then you saw Stokes on the sidelines really until that final drive, that sort of last gasp, heroic effort type thing for Indianapolis, where it ended in an interception on a Hail Mary as time expired and Green Bay gets the win, and Stokes was back out on the field for that final drive. But much of the second half, it was Jair Alexander at CB1, of course, Keyshawn Nixon in the slot, and then CB2 was being held down, and being held down well by Carrington Valentine. Stokes didn't appear to be injured. Valentine was plugged in, and it was kind of smooth sailing for Green Bay in that defense much of the afternoon, especially on that back end at cornerback and at safety. Kind of what I led with here, too. It's impossible to have too many options at cornerback. Like, there isn't a defensive coordinator in the world at any level, whether it's high school, college, or pros, who's going to be like, we got too many cornerbacks on the roster to try to figure this thing out. It's a good thing to be dealing with if you're Jeff Hafley, the defensive coordinator. Matt LaFleur echoed in his press conference on Monday, nothing injury-related with Eric Stokes as to why he was on the sidelines and Valentine was in. He credited it to competition. He said there's going to be competition for snaps, and he said Carrington Valentine's been really showing out at practice, and it led to him getting more run on the field on Sunday. And he said, slight paraphrase here, but he more or less said, 1 week it might be Stokes getting more snaps than Valentine. The next week it could be Valentine getting more than Stokes. And he also alluded to the fact that Green Bay isn't afraid to play a bunch of players. And he thought it was good to have that sort of competition, because then when you talk about real depth on a roster and you start going lower on the ladder, and there's some of these young guys that are chomping at the bit, trying to get out on the field just for a couple of snaps, maybe show up in special teams, they're seeing that Green Bay is not afraid to plug and play different options and deploy different methods, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And Carrington Valentine, a perfect example of that, just 9 snaps in week 1 when Eric Stokes had 67. Week 2, Valentine gets 32. Stokes gets 24 in the win for Green Bay. So the question here is like, what's going on at cornerback? But it's a good thing. It's a good thing for the Packers. Mitch, I am on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Appreciate all the support as we build the channel up. Snap count video. Looking back at week 2, the win against the Indianapolis Colts. Sticking with the secondary. Another thing I hinted at week 1 in the snap counts video. I said I thought the rookie safety Evan Williams out of Oregon was too much of an impact player to not give him some sort of opportunity. He had 0 snaps defensively in that week 1 loss to Philadelphia. I thought that would change at some point. He went from 0 snaps week 1 to 20 on Sunday, and it affected Javon Bullard, the other starting safety, who I believe, don't quote me, I think Bullard played 100% of the snaps against Philadelphia. He was out there for 42 of 56. Good for 75% against Indianapolis. And, of course, X-Man Xavier McKinney was out there for 100% of the snaps. And this was not a knock on, like, Bullard's game at all. It's very, very similar to the cornerback spot. Like, I watched that game Sunday against Indianapolis, and at no point in time was I like, oh, my gosh, Eric Stokes is struggling. You got to get him off the field, put in Valentine. It was none of that. It was just Valentine's probably too good to only give him 9 snaps like he did in week 1. And Evan Williams, Javon Bullard, 2 rookies trying to prove their worth. Javon Bullard's the starting safety next to McKinney, but Evan Williams seems like one of those guys too where it's like, man, they got to find a way to get him on the field because he has that type of impact. He recovered the onside kick near the end of the game for Green Bay, and then defensively had the interception on the Hail Mary. You can make of that what you will. It was obviously a prevent situation for Green Bay where a lot of times they're just going to knock the ball down. Anything but giving up the Hail Mary for a touchdown and you're fine, outside of a flag too, obviously. But Evan Williams had the interception on the final play of the game, but he was out there for 20 snaps. Bullard goes from, I think it was 100% against Philadelphia to 75% against Indianapolis. And again, it had nothing to do with Bullard's play. He's been really, really solid. Williams just kind of seems to be an impact guy that needs and really deserves some run on the field. And these different combinations that Jeff Hafley has to use, it definitely has me giddy, because I believe he'll actually deploy multiple looks. Like, I think in past years with Green Bay, especially on the defensive side of the ball, we've kind of looked around, and I really think at that defensive front, and we've talked about it, at least I have with buddies, and it's like, man, I think there's so many options Green Bay could do defensively to just try to fool an offense or shake things up or give a quarterback a different look, and we just didn't really see it too much under Mike Pettin. Sure as hell didn't see it too much with Joe Barry. And Jeff Hafley is not afraid to mix things up and show different looks to an opposing offense, to an opposing quarterback, just to keep them guessing or at least keep their mind running a little bit as to what Green Bay might be doing on that side of the ball. And I have the evidence to back it up. If you don't want to follow the snap counts, but I think that's a valid case as well. Carrington playing more snaps than Eric Stokes in week 2 after it was 67-9 in the snap department in week 1 in favor of Stokes, the safety position. Evan Williams going from 0 to 20, and it had nothing to do with injury. It had nothing to do with performance. If you want to look at another one, there's a still shot that Andy Herman tweeted out, the Pack-A-Day podcast on his Twitter account, a still shot from a 3rd and long in that game against Indianapolis. And Jeff Hafley, I mean, this had me smiling. This had me very, very happy. Green Bay had a defensive front on their line on a 3rd and long against the Colts where it was Preston Smith and Kingsley Enagbare on the outside. And on the interior of the defensive line, it was Rashawn Gary and Lucas Van Ness. I mean, if Green Bay's willing to go to that well, at least occasionally, again, just to mix things up, I'm all for it. I'm here for it. I think they have the depth and the pieces to do that on the defensive side of the ball. I thought in recent years there were some teams, some defenses, I should say, for Green Bay, where they could have mixed it up and could have gotten a little more chaotic in a good way and just didn't. And they kept it more vanilla. I don't think Hafley's a vanilla guy. I think he's going to try to deploy different looks, and I love it. And that 3rd long against Indianapolis, you're looking left to right, and it was Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, Lucas Van Ness, Kingsley Enagbare. Count me in on that. Count me in on that. I mean, I don't like taking snaps away from Kenny Clark, and Devontae Wyatt had a great afternoon with a stuffed run, a TFL, and he had a sack later on in the game as well. But man, that's a ferocious look for Jeff Hafley to put out there for a defensive front. And as for the safety spot with Williams getting 20 snaps, when's the last time? I don't know if I want to call it an embarrassment of riches at safety, but when's the last time Green Bay had this much talent? At least it appears. You have the proven commodity in the X-Man, and now you see two rookies who are kind of fitting in seamlessly to start. And I know it's a small sample size, but as the weeks carry on, if this keeps up with Evan Williams and Javon Bullard both showing out, I'm trying to remember the last time I felt this good about the safety spot and the depth for Green Bay. Because the last couple of years, it's kind of been patchwork. I liked Rudy Ford, but you bring in Jonathan Owens for a year, and they've just been shuffling bodies sort of in and out at safety, some that have worked better than others. Now you have Xavier McKinney, regarded as one of the best in the league, and two rookies who are really, really fitting in nicely for Green Bay. So I think it might be a slight exaggeration at this point to say it's an embarrassment of riches at safety, but let's see how these two rookies pan out down the road in the weeks to come. Tight end was a big topic of interest in week one as Tucker Kraft was out there for 64 snaps compared to 17 for Luke Musgrave. And in fact, the title of the video last week was I think I titled it Packers Snap Count. Is there a new tight end one in Green Bay or something like that? And Matt LaFleur said after the game, he said in a presser earlier in game week before the lead up, or in the lead up, I should say, to the contest against Indianapolis, that they would like to get that more evened out. Now, Sunday it was more evened out, but it was still heavily in favor of Tucker Kraft. Kraft was out there for 56 of 70 snaps, Musgrave 31 for 70, so it's an 80% to 44% differential. I think for this game plan, too, where Green Bay clearly wanted to run the ball until they couldn't, and they never reached a spot where they couldn't run the ball anymore against that Indianapolis front. You want Tucker Kraft out there. He's so good in the run blocking game at the end of that line. Greg Olson, the color commentator for Fox, brought it up multiple times how impressed he was with Tucker Kraft's run blocking ability, and I think he offers that on a much higher level than Luke Musgrave. Now, Musgrave can offer you things that Kraft, or I should say, can offer you things better than what Kraft can in certain areas. Like I would say the vertical threat definitely goes to Musgrave over Tucker Kraft, but it sure in the hell seems like Green Bay's leaning towards Tucker Kraft as their tight end one. And LaFleur was asked about that again on Monday and sort of just sang the praises of Tucker Kraft. I also think, Kraft only had 2 catches on 2 targets for 16 yards. Musgrave had 1 catch on 1 target. This isn't a knock on Malik Willis. He's only been there for, 3.5 weeks. As long as Jordan Love's out, don't draw any conclusions on the pass catchers for Green Bay. I know a lot of people are like, wow, Christian Watson didn't even get a look yesterday, and it was a quiet day for most of the pass catchers, including the tight ends. You can't draw any conclusions based on what's going on with the Packers right now because they're playing with a backup quarterback. And again, it's not a knock on Willis. If Willis had been there for a year or two, or this was his 3rd year as the backup in Green Bay, they'd likely be far more comfortable letting him air it out more than the 14 times we saw on Sunday. Game script also dictates a lot of that. Green Bay wasn't really in a position Sunday where they needed to air it out. They led from the rip and never squandered that lead. Of course, it got a little hairy in the second half, especially at the end. But I think how game flow can dictate some things as well for the passing game, and they just didn't need to. So I'm not worried about the lack of opportunity at the tight end position yesterday as it comes to, or as it pertains to the pass catching department for Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. I think that'll be fine once Jordan Love's back. But yeah, snap count's still heavily in favor of Tucker Kraft. Extra notes in this one, things that stood out as we finish up. Mitch, I am on YouTube. Appreciate all the support as always. Eric Wilson, man. I said last week, if Eric Wilson's getting a heavy amount of snaps at the linebacker position, might not be great for your defense. And I don't think he's not a bad player. I just think he's such a good addition to the special teams, but you should probably have better options at linebacker. He only played 8 snaps defensively for Green Bay, and he had 2 massive impact plays. Think about that production. 8 snaps defensively, and on 1 was the first play of the 4th quarter, a 3rd and 1 option to the left side, sort of a speed option for Indianapolis, and he bottled it up, single-handedly, until he got a convoy of Packer tacklers to dive in at the end, he shut down a speed option from Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor on the first play of the fourth quarter, and it held Indianapolis to a field goal attempt that I believe they missed from like 50 yards. And then he had an interception of Anthony Richardson as well. Not to mention, on a different snap, he forced a fumble. Green Bay didn't recover it, but 8 snaps, 2 of them he makes massive impact plays. He chips in with a forced fumble as well. Eric Wilson gets a huge hat tip in this one. And I know PFF grades aren't the be-all, end-all, and it was just a really, really, really tiny sample size of 8 snaps of a possible 56. But Eric Wilson graded out as Green Bay's best defensive player at 99.4. And if you want to take more proof that the Stokes-Valentine switch wasn't performance-based, PFF actually had Stokes graded higher in yesterday's game than Carrington Valentine. Stokes at 69.1, Valentine at 65.9. Both fall into that average range according to Pro Football Focus. But Eric Wilson was a monster at 8 snaps, and you love to see that, different guys stepping up. One thing I was wrong about, at least in the short term, I said on last week's video, I thought Edgerrin Cooper, very small sample size for him. I know I've used that term a couple of times here, but he wasn't on the field much in week 1, but I thought when he was on the field, he was flying around, and it was pretty much controlled. There were a couple of plays where he looked like he was aligned incorrectly, and obviously that's a no-no, and one led to a pretty big run for Saquon Barkley, where it appeared to be on Edgerrin Cooper. I don't know if any of the coaches were asked about that specifically in press conferences this past week. He was only out there for 7 snaps. I do still expect that to tick up as the weeks carry along. Remember, he missed a big part of the summer and training camp and preseason with an injury, so he's still coming back from that. And when you're a veteran, it's different compared to when you're a rookie. They're going to ease you back into things, and that's what Green Bay's doing with Edgerrin Cooper. And finally, I just thought this one was interesting, and this could have just had to do with how the game unraveled. Kingsley Enagbare played 31 snaps to Preston Smith's 28. Both of them outdid Lucas Van Ness. Van Ness wasn't out there a whole lot against Philadelphia. He was out there more against Indianapolis, but maybe still not where people would like to see his totals be at. I just thought it was interesting that Enagbare outsnapped Preston Smith when it wasn't injury-related, certainly wasn't performance-related. It goes back to the depth. I think at that end spot, you've got options. And Preston Smith and Rashawn Gary are your top 2 dogs. And then after that, you have Enagbare and you have Lucas Van Ness. And I think there are some teams in the NFL who would take Enagbare and Van Ness as maybe their starting duo on the edge of a defensive line. And for Green Bay, they're running with the 2s. Well, not running with the 2s. They're listed as the 2s, as the backups behind Smith and Gary. But yesterday it was Enagbare with 31 snaps to Preston Smith's 28. And a final shout out, you got to remember, there were people in the lead up to this that said, I don't know about Malik Willis. I don't know. Could be a really short leash. Will we see Sean Clifford? Won't we see Sean Clifford? Willis was fine. The game plan was executed perfectly. They didn't ask him to do a whole hell of a lot, but he didn't need to do a whole hell of a lot for the Packers to get the win in this one over the Colts. All right, that's all we've got for Packers snap counts. A lot of competition still brewing throughout the season. Never a bad thing for a team in Green Bay's shoes that feels like they can be a legitimate threat and a legitimate contender, not only in the NFC, but in the NFL. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe. We'll see you next time.